watching Startup Central with me, Nantara Rai, working from home. This is the only show of its kind on Indian television dedicated to startups, innovation, technology, disruption. Basically, if it falls under the gambit of the new economy, it's here every weekday on your favorite channel at 6 p.m. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what we've seen during the pandemic is Edtech becoming the buzzword. There was no choice. You're not going to educate your kids. Kids are not going to go to college. There was no choice but for Edtech to become the norm. The question is, will Edtech stay the norm in the post-corona world? You're getting a lot of positive news about vaccines. So we thought, let's discuss the future of Edtech. In the first 9 months alone of 2020, we've seen nearly $2.2 billion being pumped into Edtech. That's across 76 deals. You've seen unicorns. You've seen unicorns double their valuations also, like in the case of Unacademy just 24 hours ago. I'm going to be discussing the future of Edtech with Pankaj Makkar, who is the Managing Director of Bertelsmann India Investments. Pankaj, thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Startup Central. My first question to you is, Edtech, is it here to stay forever? You know, the avatar can perhaps change. But, you know, I would imagine that whenever there are vaccines and, you know, in the post-corona world, people will be dying to get out, go back to school, go to college campuses, all of that. So do you think Edtech will stay this hot?
Nantara, first of all, thank you for having me on the show. Really good to be here and talking about education technology and the emergence of it, not only on a national scale, but on a global scale. And the short answer to your question is, yes, this is a trend which will not get reversed. In fact, this is a trend which will only get accelerated in the next, I would say, 10 to 15 years. And let me say that, look, education as a sector has not been either innovated or disrupted for the last 100, 200 years. The way our forefathers used to go to universities and schools, we have been educated like that. That is not going to be the case with our kids. 10 to 15 years down the line, this sector would look very, very significantly disruptive or innovated, as we now see either cabs, retail, or media sectors getting disrupted by the Netflix and the Amazons of the world.
So now let's discuss what Edtech will look like in the near future. You know, we're talking almost at the end of 2020. It's a time when you've seen Edtech companies become much, much bigger. And to be fair to them, many of them have innovated. They've tried new products. Many that didn't have live classes now have live classes. They looked at inorganic growth, all of that. But going into 2021, how do you see Edtech in India shaping up?
So, Neda, I love to compare EdTech globally as well as in India with what used to happen in, let's say, retail in early 2000s. In early 2000s, companies like Amazon, eBay, and others started mushrooming and started becoming massive mega forces in their own sectors in that time. If you fast forward that to today, and of course, when there was PayPal, which was trying to do, let's say, payments for e-commerce, there was Amazon, which was trying to do books and electronics and a few other categories. And you had eBay, which was doing P2P, e-commerce and so on. And over time, all of them emerged to become single large platforms, which were doing mostly everything. Today, I see EdTech where Byju's is doing mostly K-12. Eruditus is fundamentally doing purely adult learning and lifelong learning and so on. All of these platforms going forward will also end up building other ancillary businesses around themselves and will attract and become one shop solutions, if I were to call, or platforms which will have multiple legs to it, which is why you probably see Byju's going and acquiring more companies, because what we saw in retail in the last 20 years, we are starting to see in EdTech now. And that's probably my bet what's going to happen for the next 2 to 3 years in EdTech as well.
It's very fascinating that you're actually saying this, and Byju's, as we know, is the world's most valuable Edtech startup, a decacorn. I don't even know if it's fair to still call it a startup. But you know, Pankaj, exactly 24 hours ago, I had Ronnie Screwvala on Startup Central, and we got him a day after the acquisition made by Upgrad for test preparation. And he said something which has left a mark on me, which is that Edtech, what he thinks is that there are only going to be a couple of Edtech companies in the world that are going to create the mindset. So it's going to be like, you know, how you have a Facebook and you have a Google and Apple and Amazon. That's how it's going to be with Edtech. Do you agree with that?
To a certain extent, I do agree that there'll be extremely large platforms, as we saw in media, where there's only one YouTube, etc., unless you're looking at China, etc., where due to certain restrictions, there could be local avatars. So yes, I think wherever the product is homogeneous, learning can get translated, especially when we talk about lifelong learning, especially where Upgrad plays, which is all mostly adult learning and not K-12 kids, etc. Those businesses tend to be a lot more global, and hence global large corporations can be formed in those sectors. When we start talking about K-12, where nuances of engaging students on a local basis becomes a lot more important, blended education when it comes to physical and online put together becomes important. It becomes very difficult to create a globally scalable business. And over there, I do see some local large players emerging all across the world. And hence, I would say it's kind of different for college and above and K-12 and below as two different segments in education. But I would generally agree where Ronnie and Upgrad sits. I can see some of that trend happening.
Pankaj, the other thing I wanted to ask you was, you know, obviously, like you said, we are in the early 2000s. If you were to compare it to e-tail, and things get refined, they get better and better over time. So you've seen companies pivot, you've seen mushrooming of edtech companies, always a herd mentality also, right, when there's a buzzword. So going into 2021, when everyone has experimented with K-12, with upskilling, catering to B2B, all of that, I would imagine in 2021, we will see the refining and going in for more penetration. Right now you have to address an urgent need. That will be over perhaps by 2021. So what are you anticipating for the new year?
I do think that in 2021 and 2022, most of these platforms will end up penetrating the student ecosystem a lot more. So there is a war of reaching the next student and the next student and so on. So the penetration war would continue in my mind, number one. Number two, as these platforms become larger, they will also become a lot more affordable because they will want to go to the tier 2 and tier 3 cities where affordability is still a challenge. So a lot of these products will inherently have to become a lot more affordable. The third big trend, which I think will happen in EdTech, is education to a certain extent getting opened up for the regulated sector. Now, if you look at the degrees market, India always have not allowed online education to play in the degrees market. But because of COVID now, certain universities and colleges can give online degrees. That's a biggest market, probably much bigger than the tutorial market that we have seen so far. And as that opens up, I do feel that there is a very strong likelihood of online businesses getting built in the so-called regulated segments, which so far were not allowed from an online perspective, but they are now today.
Okay, so you think basically the future is going to be what? Maybe more regional languages, so that you really go in, your proliferation becomes better, more affordable as well. It's still seen a little bit on the expensive side. And third, one-on-one learning. Have I got that right?
Absolutely. And if I were to then broad base these points, as you just mentioned, into 4 big mega trends. First, as we call it, massification of education, whether it's going into tier 2, tier 3, whether it means you are penetrating with different languages. all that massification is going to happen in a big way across creating access, affordability, and making sure quality is kind of good. That's one big trend. The second trend that we see happening is, of course, what you were referring to as personalized learning. We try to put it on the gambit of technology where assessment tools, personalized learning, flipped classrooms, etc. will become pretty much commodity plays for most edtech players. Number three is basically what we call as private good. Education slowly is becoming a private good. It was part of a restricted or regulated list by the government, and hence it was a public good across the globe. But if you look at geographies like Brazil, where it did become a private good, innovation did happen in those sectors, and an education sector in a country like Brazil is very popular. I think some of that will happen in India as well. And frankly, when you open up hundreds of millions of students to education, you will definitely see a movement of some of the Western good quality institution, either in the online avatar or in a blended avatar, trying to get access to these students. So I do see some movement of Western institutions coming into India, either by licensing their technologies or content to these edtech players, or setting up. I don't think they'll set up massive campuses, etc. That's not needed. But now in a online avatar, they can definitely come into the country and provide good quality courses and content to hundreds of millions of students as we take India to the next big chapter of reaching higher gross enrollment ratios and other ancillary learning products.
Pankaj, as I wind down this conversation, I want to end with exactly the same note I started off this interview. You compared EdTech to the e-commerce industry early 2000s. We've been hearing about how there is revenge shopping, revenge holidaying and vacationing during the COVID times. Will we not see revenge schooling, like kids dying to go back to school, meet their friends, interact, the social angle? I understand EdTech is here forever, but you don't see that playing as a bit of a dampener at all?
First of all, I think that all parents, including me, would love our kids to go to school, after COVID and have normal lives. I do think that phenomena will be a lot more in K-12, where social interaction plays a very important role in upbringing as well as development of children as they become adults. When it comes to lifelong learning, certification programs, if somebody is trying to learn big data, etc., yes, there is a role to be played as far as physical infrastructure and social interaction is concerned, but the same course can be taught online. And I think that is where we will see probably less issues in terms of going back to school. In that category, online is there to stay and will play a big role going forward as well.
Pankaj, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Startup Central. Look forward to many more interviews with you. Incidentally, we are planning a panel discussion soon, another one on EdTech. Would love to feature you in that as well. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a short commercial break, but stay tuned. Coming up on the other side, we're going to be touching base with a startup which is backed by the very coveted Y Combinator. Is gone in for a fundraiser. That and more coming up.